"There's a recorder in your office," the little girl whispered. William Carter looked up from his screen, his fingers freezing over the keyboard. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "There's a recorder in your office, sir." William leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully now. "What recorder?" "The one recording you." His eyes sharpened. "That's a serious thing to say. What recorder are you talking about? Where is it?" Annie glanced toward the hallway, then back at him. She raised one finger to her lips. "Talk quiet." Something in her voice made him listen. William stood up and walked around the desk. Annie gently tugged his sleeve and pointed down. "Under there," she whispered. William bent down and looked beneath the desk. It took him a moment to see it. A small black recorder taped neatly under the center of the desk, angled toward his chair. His face went still. He reached up, pulled the recorder free, and turned it over in his hand. He found the switch and pressed it. The tiny red light went dark. He pressed another button and a faint playback hiss came from the device. Then his own voice, clear and unmistakable, talking about a contract and a meeting schedule. Someone had been recording him. He turned the device off completely and placed it on the desk very slowly. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said quietly. Annie clasped her hands together. "Yesterday after school, I was waiting for my mom. She was cleaning the conference room. I came in here because I left my blue crayon. The door was a little open. I saw your fiancée come in." William's jaw tightened slightly. "You're sure it was her?" "Yes, sir." "You need to be very sure, Annie." "I am," she said. "And you can check the camera. There's a camera in your office." William froze for half a second. Then he turned quickly, woke his computer, and opened the security system. His office camera feed appeared on the screen. He pulled up the recording from the previous afternoon and scrolled back. At 3:12 p.m., the office door opened. Victoria walked in. On the screen, Victoria closed the door, looked around the room, then walked behind his desk. She knelt down, reached into her purse, and pulled out a small device, the recorder. She pressed it under the desk exactly where Annie had pointed. Then she stood up, took out her phone, and made a call. Victoria's voice filled the office speakers, clear and calm. "It's done," she said. "The recorder is in his office. He's in meetings all afternoon, so he won't notice." William felt something cold move through his chest. "We're moving to the next step." Victoria continued on the recording. "After the wedding, he'll sign the merger, and when he signs, the company is ours." She paused, listening to the person on the other end, then smiled a smile William had seen 100 times and trusted every single time. "He trusts me," she said softly. "He doesn't even lock his office when I'm here." Then she laughed quietly. The office was completely quiet. The recording ended. William did not move. He just stared at the screen, at the frozen image of the woman he was about to marry, standing behind his desk like she belonged there, next to him. Annie spoke very softly. "I was going to tell you this morning," she said. "But when I came, your secretary said you were in a meeting. You were in the big conference room for a long time, so I waited. I didn't want to tell anyone else. I thought I should tell you myself." William slowly turned his head and looked down at her. "You waited all day to tell me?" he asked quietly. Annie nodded. "Yes, sir. I didn't want to go home before you knew." He looked at her for a long moment, then back at the screen, then at the small recorder on his desk. He reached forward and closed the video window, then picked up the recorder and locked it in his desk drawer. "Annie," he said quietly. "From now on, we don't talk about this in this office when anyone else is around. Not out loud. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." At that exact moment, there was a soft knock on the office door. Both of them turned. The door opened before William could answer. Victoria stepped inside. "There you are," she said warmly. "I've been looking for you." Her eyes moved from William to Annie, then back to William again. "Am I interrupting something?" William looked at her, and for the first time since he had known her, he did not see the woman he loved. He saw the woman on the screen, the woman kneeling behind his desk, the woman placing a recorder under his table. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, smooth, completely controlled. "Not at all," William Carter said. "Annie was just leaving." Annie looked at him. He gave her a very small nod, a signal. "Go." She picked up her backpack quietly and walked past Victoria toward the door. As she passed, Victoria gave her a polite smile, the kind adults give children they don't really see. "Goodbye, Annie," Victoria said sweetly. Annie looked up at her for a brief second, then said, "Goodbye, ma'am." Then she walked out into the hallway inside the office. The door closed softly. Victoria walked toward William's desk. "You look tired," she said gently. "You work too much." William looked at her, his face unreadable, his hands resting calmly on the desk, the same desk where just hours ago, she had knelt and planted a recorder to destroy him. "Yes," he said quietly. "I guess I do." Victoria did not sit down right away. She walked slowly around the office instead, trailing her fingers lightly across the back of the leather chair, the edge of the bookshelf, the corner of his desk, comfortable, familiar, like she already belonged to the room, like she already owned part of it. "You're working late again," Victoria said softly. "You promised you wouldn't do that the week before the engagement party." William gave a small, tired smile. "I remember promising a lot of things. You've seemed distant today," she said. "Is something wrong?" William leaned back in his chair and looked at her carefully. Really looked at her. He had always thought Victoria was the most composed woman he had ever met. She never rushed, never stumbled over words, never seemed unsure. Now he realized something else. She never seemed surprised either. "Just work," he said. "Board pressure, merger details, lawyers being lawyers." At the word merger, something almost invisible passed through her eyes. Not emotion exactly, more like calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by warmth. "That merger is going to make you even more powerful than you already are," she said, smiling. "You've built something incredible, William. You should be proud of yourself." He studied her for a moment, proud enough to sign it away. She tilted her head slightly, as if amused. "You're not signing anything away. You're expanding. There's a difference." He gave a quiet hum like he was considering that. In reality, his mind was replaying the recording over and over again. "After the wedding, he'll sign. And when he signs, the company is ours." Victoria walked around the desk and stopped beside him. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You need to learn to trust the people who love you," she said softly. William almost laughed. Instead, he covered her hand with his and squeezed lightly, playing the role she expected him to play. "I'm trying," he said. She leaned down and kissed his cheek. "Good, because after the wedding, everything will be easier. No more fighting the board alone. No more late nights. You won't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. Everything will be ours." The words echoed in his head again, but his face didn't change. "I was thinking," Victoria continued, "maybe after the honeymoon, we can start restructuring. Bring in some of my people to help manage the transition. You trust me, don't you?" William looked up at her. This was the moment he realized. Not the recorder, not the video. This moment right here where she asked for trust while standing in the middle of a lie. He held her gaze for a long second, then nodded slowly. "Of course, I trust you." Victoria smiled, relieved, satisfied, and for the first time. William understood that her smile was not warmth. It was victory practiced too early. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from because your voice matters and your story matters too. And if you believe in justice, kindness, and standing up for those who are invisible, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next story. "Good," she said. "That makes everything simpler." They talked a few minutes more about the engagement party, about the guest list, about flowers and venues and things that suddenly sounded like props in a play he had not realized he was acting in. Finally, Victoria checked her watch. "I have a dinner meeting," she said. "Don't stay too late." "I never do," William replied. William watched the door close behind her. He did not move for a long time. After a while, he opened the drawer and took the recorder out again. He turned it over in his hands, studying it like a piece of evidence in a trial. Then he pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Mark," he said to his head of security. "I need you in my office now. And don't tell anyone you're coming." "Yes, sir," the voice replied immediately. William ended the call and sat back in his chair. A soft knock came at the door 15 minutes later. "Come in," William said. Mark Jensen stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He was in his early 50s, former military, the kind of man who noticed everything and talked very little. "You wanted to see me, sir." William didn't answer right away. He simply held up the recorder and placed it on the desk between them. Mark's eyes dropped and his expression changed instantly. "Where did you get that?" "Under my desk," William said. Mark looked up sharply. "Since when?" "Since yesterday," William replied. "Maybe longer." Mark picked up the device, turning it carefully in his hands. "This isn't cheap equipment," he said. "Whoever put this here knew what they were doing." "Yes," William said quietly. "She did." Mark looked up. "She." William met his eyes. "Victoria." Mark didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he said carefully, "Are you sure?" William turned his monitor slightly and replayed the security footage. This time, he let the audio play. Victoria's voice filled the room again, calm and confident, laying out the plan like she was discussing dinner reservations. When the video ended, Mark leaned back slowly. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. William closed the video. "I want to know everything," he said. "Who she's talking to, who else is involved, where the information is going, everything." Mark nodded once. "You want me to pull a full investigation?" I want you to pretend we don't know anything, William said. I want them to think their plan is working. Mark studied him for a moment, then nodded again. Understood. William looked back out at the city lights. She said, after the wedding, I'd signed the merger. That means they need me cooperative. Mark gave a grim half-smile. You think you can pretend? William's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. I built this company by pretending not to be afraid when I was, he said quietly. I can pretend to be in love a little longer, Mark nodded slowly. And the little girl, he asked. The janitor's kid, how did she find it? William was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because nobody sees her. Mark left through the private stairwell exactly the way William had instructed. No cameras, no front desk, no curious eyes. When the door closed behind him, the office felt larger and quieter than before, like a stage after the audience had gone home. William did not go back to work. Instead, he sat there in the dim light, hands folded loosely in front of him, staring at nothing. When you spend most of your life building something, you assume the biggest threats will come from the outside competitors. Markets, lawsuits, bad deals. You prepare for those. You hire lawyers for those. You build security systems for those. No one ever teaches you how to prepare for betrayal that comes smiling, wearing a ring you bought. He opened the bottom drawer again and looked at the recorder. Small, cheap looking, ordinary. That was the part that bothered him the most. The most dangerous thing in his life right now looked like something you could buy at an airport kiosk. His mind moved methodically, the way it always did when a deal turned dangerous. Step 1. Do nothing different. Step 2. Make them comfortable. Step 3. Let them talk. Step 4. Follow the money. Step 5. Close the trap. He closed the drawer again and stood up, grabbing his jacket. As he stepped out into the hallway, he saw Loretta near the far wall, emptying a trash bin, and Annie sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the reception desk, drawing again. Annie looked up when she saw him. Not scared, not curious, just watching. He walked over slowly and stopped a few feet from her drawing. What are you working on tonight? He asked. A different house, Annie said. He nodded toward the paper. This one got people in it. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. He studied the drawing for a moment. A small house again, but this time there were 2 stick figures inside and one very small one between them. The windows were bright yellow like before. Who's that? He asked, pointing to the smallest figure. That's the kid, Annie said. And the 2 big ones, the people who don't leave, she said simply. William felt that same strange pressure in his chest again. He cleared his throat slightly. Annie, can I ask you something? Yes, sir. Why didn't you tell your mom about the recorder? Annie thought for a moment before answering. Because she would be scared of what? Of losing her job, Annie said. She says, when you don't have a lot of money, you have to be careful around people who do. William nodded slowly. That was a lesson he knew. Well, you weren't scared? He asked. Annie shrugged a little. I was, but I thought maybe you should be more scared than me. Because it's your office. For a moment, William didn't know whether to laugh or sigh. That's a very honest way to look at it, he said. Annie looked up at him. Are you going to be in trouble? He shook his head. No, but some other people might be. She nodded like that made sense, then went back to coloring. William stood there a moment longer, then said quietly. You did the right thing, Annie. What you did today, that took courage. She looked up again. My mom says courage is when you're scared, but you do the right thing anyway. She's a smart woman, William said. Yes, sir, she is. He hesitated, then added. From now on, if you see anything strange, anything at all, you tell me. Not anyone else, just me. All right, Annie nodded. Yes, sir. And Annie, he said, lowering his voice slightly. Be careful what you say when people are around. Pretend you don't know anything. She nodded again. Very serious now, like a secret. Yes, he said, like a secret. Later that night, after Loretta and Annie had gone home, and the building was almost empty, William sat in his car in the underground parking garage, but did not start the engine. The concrete pillars cast long shadows under the fluorescent lights, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was sitting in a life he did not fully control. His phone buzzed. Victoria, dinner ran late. Miss you. Don't work all night. He stared at the message for a long time before replying. William, just finishing up. See you tomorrow. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Victoria, I love you. He looked at those 3 words and for the first time they looked like strategy instead of affection. He put the phone down without replying and leaned his head back against the seat. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who grew up in a small house where the heat worked only when it felt like it and his mother kept cash in a jar because she didn't trust banks. He remembered something his father once told him after a neighbor borrowed money and never paid it back. Son, His father had said, money don't change people. It just shows you who they were the whole time. William closed his eyes. Victoria hadn't changed. He had just never seen her clearly. The next morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. He wanted to see who came and went, who talked to whom, who looked nervous, who looked too calm. At 8:10 a.m., Victoria walked in carrying 2 coffees. She smiled when she saw him already at his desk. You're here early. I brought you coffee. He accepted it. Thank you. She leaned down slightly. Big meeting today always, he said. She rested her hand on the desk, the same desk where the recorder had been, and for a brief moment, her eyes flicked downward, almost unconsciously, checking, making sure. William noticed. He took a sip of the coffee and said casually, I might have to travel next week. New York, possibly DC. After that, Victoria's eyes sharpened just slightly. That sudden opportunity, he said. If the merger goes through, we'll need East Coast support anyway. She smiled slowly. Then I guess we really are building something bigger. William nodded. We are. She squeezed his shoulder gently. I always knew you were meant for more than this city. And just like that, he understood the full shape of the plan. She wasn't just planning to marry him. She was planning to move him, restructure him, surround him with her people, and slowly remove him from his own company, one signature at a time. By the way, Victoria said lightly, after the wedding, we should move some of the executive files to a shared access system. It'll make things easier for both companies during the transition. Of course, William thought. Of course it would. That makes sense, he said calmly. Well, do that. She smiled, satisfied again, and walked out of the office. William waited 5 full seconds after the door closed before he picked up the phone and called Mark. She's pushing for shared access, William said quietly. After the wedding, Mark didn't sound surprised. Then the wedding is the deadline. Yes, William said, it is. He looked out through the glass wall and saw Annie in the hallway walking beside her mother holding her small backpack with both straps pulled tight over her shoulders. For a brief moment, Annie looked through the glass and saw him. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just looked at him like they now shared something no one else in the building knew, a secret. And William Carter realized that the most important alliance in his life right now was not with his board, his lawyers, or his investors. It was with a 6-year-old girl who sat on the floor and colored houses with the lights on. The first rule William Carter gave Mark was simple. Do not touch her, William said. Do not confront her. Do not scare her. If she gets nervous, she'll move faster. And when people move faster, they make fewer mistakes. Mark nodded. So, we watch, William repeated. We listen, and we let her believe she's winning. It had been 3 days since Annie told him about the recorder. And in those 3 days, William Carter learned something he had never fully understood before. It is a very strange experience to sit across from someone at dinner, hold their hand, listen to them talk about wedding flowers and honeymoon destinations, and know they are planning to destroy you. Victoria was better at lying than anyone he had ever met. Not because she was dramatic, not because she avoided questions, but because she mixed truth with lies so smoothly that you never knew where one ended and the other began. She really did care about art. She really did like jazz. She really did remember that he hated tomatoes and that he took his coffee black after 3:00 p.m. She remembered details about his childhood he had only mentioned once. Everything felt real. That was what made her dangerous. On Thursday evening, William came home later than usual. Victoria was already there, barefoot in the kitchen, a glass of white wine in her hand, soft music playing through the house speakers. She turned when she heard him and smiled like she had been waiting all day just to see him. You look exhausted, she said. Long week, he replied, setting his keys down. Come sit, she said. I made dinner. William paused for a fraction of a second. Victoria did not cook. She ordered, she arranged, she hosted, but she did not cook. What's the occasion? He asked. She smiled and walked back toward the dining room. No occasion. I just thought you deserved one night where nobody wants something from you. He followed her slowly and sat at the table. Steak, potatoes, green beans, simple, almost like the meals he remembered from when he was young. You're full of surprises tonight, he said. Victoria poured him a glass of wine. You spend your life fighting everyone, William. Board members, competitors, politicians, I just want to be the one place you don't have to fight. He looked at her across the table at the soft light, the quiet music, the expensive plates, and he thought, you almost did it. You almost made me believe this was real. Do you remember the first time we met? She asked. At the charity event, he said. You wouldn't talk to anyone, she said, smiling at the memory. You stood near the window like you were guarding it. I was planning my exit, he said. She laughed softly. I knew then you didn't trust anyone. I trusted you, he said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them. Victoria reached across the table and touched his hand. You still can, she said gently. William looked down at her hand on his, then back up at her face. He wondered, not for the first time, if any part of her had ever been real, or if everything, every laugh, every touch, every soft word, had been part of a long, careful plan. Victoria, he said quietly, why did you really push so hard for the merger? It was a dangerous question, but he asked it like a man making conversation, not like a man building a case. She didn't pull her hand away because the world is changing, she said. Small companies don't survive anymore, William. Only giants. If we merge, we become untouchable. We, she always said, we. And if we don't, he asked. She tilted her head slightly. Then eventually someone bigger swallows you. That's how this world works. William leaned back in his chair. You sound very certain. I am, she said. I've seen what happens to men who build empires but don't know when to expand. They get sentimental. They get protective. And then they lose everything because they waited too long. He nodded slowly like he was considering her advice. In reality, he was hearing Annie's voice in his head again. After the wedding, he'll sign. And when he signs, the company is ours. Victoria stood and walked behind him, resting her hands lightly on his shoulders. I'm on your side, she said softly near his ear. You know that, right? William covered one of her hands with his. Yes, he said quietly. I know. And in that moment, he realized something important. She did not think of herself as the villain. In her mind, this was business, strategy, survival. She wasn't betraying him. She was outplaying him. There was a difference, at least to people like her. After dinner, while Victoria was upstairs taking a shower, William stepped out onto the back patio and called Mark. I need to know who she's talking to, William said. Not just the company, the person, the voice on the phone. We're working on it, Mark replied. We pulled phone logs from the office system. She uses a private line most of the time, but we got 2 numbers she calls regularly. Both are routed through a corporate exchange. Which company? William asked. Mark paused for half a second. Halbrook Systems. William felt his stomach drop slightly. Halbrook Systems was not just a competitor. It was his biggest competitor. And the CEO of Halbrook Systems was a man named Daniel Halbrook. A man known for hostile takeovers, quiet acquisitions, and once being quoted in a business magazine saying, if you want to own a company, don't attack the building. Marry the owner. William closed his eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. Mark, he said quietly. Find out everything you can about Daniel Halbrook's personal life. There was a pause on the other end. You think? I don't think anything yet, William said. I want facts. Yes, sir. William ended the call and stood alone in the dark for a long time, listening to the night insects in the trees and the faint sound of water moving in the pool behind him. If Victoria was working with Halbrook Systems, then this wasn't just corporate espionage. This was a long game, a very long game. The next afternoon, Annie sat in her usual place near the reception desk, drawing again while her mother worked down the hallway. William walked past, then stopped and came back. Hey, he said quietly. Annie looked up. Hi, sir. He glanced around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. Has anyone been in my office when I wasn't there? Besides her, Annie thought for a moment. One man. William's attention sharpened immediately. What man? I don't know his name, Annie said. Tall, gray hair. He came 2 times. He didn't talk to anyone. He went straight into your office like he knew where everything was. William felt a chill move slowly down his spine. Did my fiancé come with him? William asked. Annie nodded. The first time, yes. The second time, he came alone. He stayed a long time. He looked in your drawers. William was very still now. Annie, he said quietly. If you saw that man again, would you recognize him? She nodded. Yes, sir. William gave a slow nod. Okay. Annie looked at him carefully. Are you in trouble? She asked again. William thought about the recorder, the video, the merger, Halbrook Systems, the gray-haired man going through his office. Then he looked at the small girl sitting on the floor with a crayon in her hand. Yes, William said honestly. But not the kind of trouble people think. Annie frowned a little. What kind? He was quiet for a moment, then said. The kind where you find out the people closest to you were never really on your side. Annie looked down at her drawing again and colored one of the windows yellow. My mom says, she said softly. When people do bad things for money, they start thinking money is the same thing as winning. William nodded slowly. Your mom is right. Annie looked up at him. Are you going to let them win? William Carter looked down the long hallway toward his office, toward his desk, his company, his life's work. No, he said quietly. I'm not. The next time William saw the gray-haired man, he didn't recognize him at first. It was Friday afternoon, just after 4. The office was still busy. Phones ringing, assistants moving quickly, elevator doors opening and closing every few minutes. William stepped out of a conference room with two board members still discussing numbers, timelines, and legal language when he saw Annie sitting in her usual spot near the reception desk. She wasn't drawing this time. She was watching. Her small body was very still, her eyes fixed down the hallway toward William's office. When she saw William step out of the conference room, she didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood up. That alone was enough to get his attention. William finished his sentence to the board members, shook their hands, and said, "We'll continue this Monday." Then he walked toward Annie like it was the most normal thing in the world. "What is it?" he asked quietly as he reached her. Annie didn't look at him. She kept her eyes down the hallway and whispered, "He's here." William felt his chest tighten slightly. "Who?" "The man I told you about. The gray hair. He went into your office." William did not turn his head right away. Years of business had taught him that the first rule of catching someone was simple. Never let them see you looking for them. "Did anyone go with him?" William asked quietly. Annie shook her head. "No, sir. He told the lady at the front desk you said he could go in." William nodded once. "Okay, you did good telling me." Annie finally looked up at him. "Is he bad?" William thought about that question carefully. "He's not supposed to be in my office," he said. "And anyone who goes into someone else's office when they're not there usually isn't doing something good." Annie nodded slowly, like she understood more than a child should. William walked calmly down the hallway toward his office. He did not rush. He did not look angry. He looked like a man returning to his office after a normal meeting. But inside his mind was moving very fast. If the man was connected to Halbrook Systems and if he felt comfortable enough to walk into William's office in the middle of the day, that meant one thing. They believed they already owned the place. William opened his office door. The gay-haired man stood near the bookshelf, holding one of William's framed awards in his hands, studying it like a real estate agent evaluating a house he planned to sell. He turned when he heard the door open. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. The man was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, tall, well-dressed, calm, in a way that did not come from confidence, but from long experience winning. "Can I help you?" William asked, his voice polite but cold. The man smiled slightly and set the award back on the shelf. "You must be William. I was beginning to think I'd missed you. You're in my office." William said. "So, I'll ask again. Can I help you?" The man walked forward slowly and extended his hand. "Daniel Halbrook." William did not take the hand right away. "So, this is him," William thought. "Not a phone call, not a name on paper, a man in my office." After a moment, William shook his hand once firmly, then let go. "You have a lot of confidence walking in here uninvited." Halbrook smiled faintly. "I find it's better to walk through the front door when you plan to own the building someday." William said nothing. Halbrook looked around the office again. "You've done well for yourself." "Very well. I always respect a man who builds something from nothing." "Then you should also respect a man enough to make an appointment before going through his desk," William replied. Halbrook's eyes flickered slightly at that just for a fraction of a second. "Business requires flexibility," he said. "No," William said calmly. "Business requires permission." The two men stood there, the air between them tight and quiet. Finally, Halbrook adjusted his jacket. "I won't waste your time. I came because I prefer clean deals to messy ones. I'm not selling my company." William said immediately. Halbrook smiled. "Of course you're not. Not today." William crossed his arms. "Then this conversation is over." Halbrook shook his head slightly. "You're going to marry Victoria in 3 weeks." William did not react. Halbrook continued. "After the wedding, you're going to sign the merger agreement. After the merger, the board will restructure leadership. You'll step back gracefully. Of course, you'll keep your money, your reputation, your nice house. Everyone wins." William looked at him for a long moment. "You talk like you already own my future." Halbrook's smile did not change. "I talk like a man who understands patterns. And men like you always follow the same pattern. You build something alone for so long that eventually you get tired of fighting alone. Then someone comes along and offers to help carry the weight." He paused, then added quietly. "And that's when you lose everything." William stepped a little closer. "Let me make something very clear," he said. "You walked into my office without permission. You went through my things. You're talking about my company like it already belongs to you. That's 3 mistakes in under 5 minutes." Halbrook did not move. "I don't make mistakes, William. I make plans." William leaned slightly on the edge of his desk. "Here's the problem with plans," he said quietly. "They only work if nobody changes the rules." For the first time, Halbrook studied him more carefully. "You sound different than I expected." "People usually are," William replied. Halbrook nodded slowly. "Victoria said you were smart. She said you were disciplined. She said you were lonely enough to be predictable. There it was, not even pretending anymore. William felt something inside him go very still. Not angry, not emotional, cold. You should leave my office, William said. Halbrook picked up his coat from the chair. Think about what I said. This can end with you very rich and very comfortable, or it can end with lawyers, investigations, and a very public fight you may not win. He walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing, Halbrook said. You should be careful who you trust. In my experience, betrayal almost always comes from the people closest to you. William almost smiled at that. That's interesting advice, William said. Considering where it's coming from. Halbrook smiled once more and left. William stood alone in his office for a long time after the door closed. Then he walked to the glass wall and looked down at the city far below. Cars moved like lines of light. People hurried along sidewalks going home to dinners, families, normal problems. Behind him, on the corner of his desk, sat Annie's blue crayon. He picked it up and turned it slowly in his fingers. A 6-year-old girl saw the truth before I did, he thought. A 6-year-old girl saw the war before I knew there was one. William Carter set the crayon down, picked up his phone, and called Mark. It's bigger than we thought, William said. How big? Mark asked. William looked at the door Halbrook had just walked through. Big enough, William said quietly. That if we lose, I don't just lose my company. What do you lose? Mark asked. William thought about Victoria, the merger, the board, the recorder, the man who had just stood in his office and talked about his life like it was already decided. Everything, William said. On Monday morning, William arrived at the office earlier than everyone except the cleaning staff and the security team. He liked the building at that hour before the phones started ringing, before the board members started asking for projections and lawyers started sending emails marked urgent. Early morning was the only time the building felt honest, just concrete, glass, and quiet. He stepped out of the elevator and saw Loretta at the far end of the hallway, pushing her cleaning cart out of the executive wing. Annie walked beside her, holding her backpack with both hands, talking about something in a low, serious voice. Loretta looked up first. Morning, Mr. Carter. Morning, Miss Brooks, he said. Then he looked down at Annie. Morning, Annie. Good morning, sir, Annie said. Loretta glanced between them, sensing something she couldn't quite name. You're here early, she said. So are you, William replied. She smiled a little. Somebody's got to clean up after all you important people, William nodded. I'm starting to realize that the most important people in this building are the ones who stay after everyone else leaves. Loretta laughed softly, thinking it was just a polite thing for a rich man to say. Annie looked at him more carefully, like she understood he meant it. As Loretta rolled the cart toward the service elevator, William said quietly, Annie, can you come to my office for a minute before you go to school? I need help with something. Loretta immediately looked nervous. She didn't do anything wrong, did she? William shook his head. No, ma'am, she did something right. Loretta looked confused but nodded. All right, Annie, go on, but don't touch anything. Yes, ma'am, Annie said, then followed William down the hallway. When they entered the office, William closed the door but did not lock it. He walked behind his desk and sat down, then motioned for Annie to sit in the chair across from him. The big leather guest chair that seemed to swallow her small frame. I need you to tell me more about the gray-haired man. William said. Annie nodded. Okay, when you saw him in my office before, what was he doing? He opened your drawers, Annie said. He looked at papers. He looked at your computer, but he didn't turn it on. He just looked at everything like he was trying to remember where things were. William nodded slowly. That was exactly what a man would do if he expected to come back later, and needed to know the layout. Did he see you? William asked. Annie shook her head. No, I was in the hallway. He didn't look at me. Did he talk to anyone? The first time he talked to your fiancé, Annie said. They talked in your office. I couldn't hear everything. Just some words. William leaned forward slightly. Do you remember any of the words? Annie thought for a long moment. I remember, he said. After the wedding, it will be easier. And she said, he trusts me. He won't see it coming. William felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. You're very good at remembering things, Annie. She shrugged a little. I like listening. Yes, William said quietly. I can see that. He stood up and walked to the bookshelf, then reached up and pointed to a small black dome near the corner of the ceiling. Do you know what that is? He asked. The camera, Annie said. Yes, William said. From now on, I'm going to use the cameras more, but there are places the cameras don't see. Hallways, elevators, the parking garage. If you ever see that man again, I need you to tell me right away. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. He hesitated, then said. Annie, what I'm about to tell you is important. And it has to stay a secret between you and me, even from your mom. Not because I don't trust her, but because if she knows, she might worry. And if she worries, other people might notice. Do you understand? Annie looked very serious now. Yes, sir, I understand. He sat back down. Some people are trying to take my company away from me, he said. They're trying to trick me into signing papers that will give them control. The recorder, the man, the meetings, it's all part of a plan. Annie listened without interrupting. And the reason I'm telling you this, he continued, is because you see things that other people don't. In this building, most people see suits and titles. They see who's important and who isn't. But you see what people do when they think no one is watching. Annie thought about that, then said quietly, invisible people see everything. William looked at her, surprised. What did you say? My mom says when people don't see you, you get to see who they really are, Annie said. William leaned back slowly in his chair. Your mother is a very wise woman. Annie nodded. Yes, sir. He opened one of his desk drawers and took out a small notebook and a pen. He slid them across the desk to her. From now on, if you see the gray-haired man or if you see my fiancé doing anything strange in my office or talking to someone in private, I want you to write it down. He said, time, place, what you saw, what you heard. Like a detective. Annie's eyes widened slightly. Like in the movies. Yes, William said. Like in the movies. She picked up the notebook carefully like it was something important. Okay. And Annie, he added, you're not in trouble. You're helping me, but you have to be very careful. Don't let anyone know you're watching. Don't let anyone know you're writing things down. I can hide it in my backpack, she said immediately. He almost smiled. That's a good idea. She looked at the notebook, then back at him. Are you going to call the police? William was quiet for a moment. Not yet, he said. Right now, I need them to think their plan is working. If they think I know, they'll change the plan and we won't be able to prove anything. Annie nodded slowly. So, you're pretending? Yes, he said. I'm pretending. She thought about that for a second. Then said, that's like when kids at school pretend to be your friends so they can sit at your lunch table, but they really just want your cookies. William stared at her for a moment, then laughed quietly, the first real laugh he had had in days. Yes, Annie, he said. It's exactly like that, except the cookies are worth a few $1 billion. Annie's eyes went wide. That's a lot of cookies. Yes, he said. It is. There was a knock on the office door. Both of them froze for a split second. William stood up and walked to the door, opening it calmly. Victoria stood there, smiling. I was looking for you. Your assistant said you were in early. Her eyes moved past him into the office and landed on Annie sitting in the big leather chair holding the small notebook. Victoria's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened slightly. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said sweetly. William shook his head. Not at all. Annie was just helping me with something. Victoria stepped inside slowly. Helping you with what? William didn't hesitate. I'm sponsoring a scholarship program for employees' children, he said smoothly. I asked Annie to help me test some of the materials, make sure they make sense to kids, not just adults. Victoria looked at Annie again, then back at William. That's very generous of you, William shrugged slightly. I remember what it's like to need help and not have it. Victoria walked closer and rested her hand lightly on his arm. That's one of the things I love about you, she said softly. You never forgot where you came from. William looked at her and for a brief moment he wondered again which parts of her were real and which parts were strategy. Annie, Victoria said, smiling down at her. You must be very smart if Mr. Carter asked for your help. Annie held the notebook tightly but nodded politely. Yes, ma'am. Victoria smiled wider. Well, we're very busy people, so we'll let you get to school. Okay. Annie looked at William. He gave her a small nod. She stood up, put the notebook in her backpack, and walked to the door. As she passed William, she looked up at him for just a second, a quick, serious look. A look that said, I understand. I won't say anything. When she left, Victoria closed the door behind her and turned back to William. A scholarship program, she said lightly. You never told me you were planning that. William walked back behind his desk and sat down. I've been thinking about a lot of things lately, he said. Victoria studied him for a moment. You've changed this week, she said quietly. William met her eyes. People change when they learn new information. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then Victoria smiled again. Warm, beautiful, careful. Well, she said, I hope whatever you learn doesn't change how you feel about me. William held her gaze and said the only thing he could say without revealing everything. We'll see, he said. William Carter arrived at the office on Tuesday with a quiet intensity that made the lobby feel different as soon as he stepped in. The city was still waking up. Sunlight streaming across the polished marble floors, bouncing off glass walls, and reflecting in the metallic elevator doors. Everyone who saw him felt a subtle tension in the air, the kind that comes from knowing someone is thinking 10 steps ahead while the rest of the world is still focused on its own small chaos. Annie was already at her usual spot near the reception desk, backpack beside her, drawing quietly in her notebook. She looked up as William approached, giving him a small nod. He returned it and motioned for her to follow him into his office. Once the door was closed, he gestured for her to sit in the same chair as before. "Good morning, Annie," he said softly, settling into his chair behind the desk. "I need you to pay close attention today." Annie tilted her head. "To what, sir?" "To everything that happens around this office, not just people, but timing, movements, conversations. Anything that looks normal might not be." Annie nodded, already taking the notebook from her backpack. "Yes, sir." William leaned back and studied her for a long moment. "You know why I asked you to come here early this morning?" She shook her head slightly. "Because you needed help. Because I need to understand exactly what's happening without alerting anyone who shouldn't be alerted," he said. "And because you saw things others can't see." Annie's lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw your fiancé put the recorder under your desk." "Yes," William said. "And she called someone. The camera caught her. I need to know everything she's planning." Annie scribbled notes quickly, her small hand moving faster than anyone expected. "She talked about the merger. She said after the wedding, you'd sign and everything would be theirs." William nodded. "Exactly. And now we have to watch every step carefully." They didn't have long to discuss before the office door opened again. Victoria stepped in carrying a folder. She gave a warm, practiced smile. "William, good morning. Did I wake you early?" William remained calm, letting the questions slide past him. "Not at all," he said. "I was just reviewing some notes." Victoria set the folder down and leaned slightly toward him. "Busy day ahead. Board meeting, client calls, and a few personnel discussions. I thought I'd go over some of the material with you beforehand." William nodded, slowly. "Of course. Let's go over it." Annie watched quietly from her chair, flipping open the notebook. Her eyes scanned the office, noting where Victoria moved, how she adjusted her clothing, where her gaze lingered. Every subtle motion was a piece of the puzzle. She noticed the slight hesitation when Victoria's eyes flicked toward the camera near the ceiling, the almost imperceptible pause in her step. She noted it carefully. Victoria spoke to William in her usual calm, persuasive tone, outlining the details of a new initiative for a potential client and suggesting minor adjustments to the marketing strategy. Every word sounded professional, thoughtful, supportive, exactly the image she wanted him to see. William listened attentively, nodding, asking subtle questions that didn't reveal his true knowledge. He didn't move toward anger or suspicion in front of her. His eyes occasionally flicked to Annie, who nodded slightly, her small hand tightening around the pen as she continued taking notes. She was silent but present like a shadow. No one would notice unless they were paying attention. "William," Victoria said suddenly, leaning slightly closer to emphasize a point. "I think we could adjust the budget slightly to increase efficiency in the regional office. It's a minor change, but it could improve results significantly." He considered her words, then nodded. "That's an interesting perspective. Let's analyze the numbers before implementing anything." Her smile did not falter. "Of course, I just want to make sure you have all the information to make the best decision." Annie noted the way Victoria positioned herself, leaning in just enough to appear engaged without looking suspicious. She noted how her voice softened slightly when she mentioned efficiency and results. She was cataloging everything, even the tone of her words, understanding that sometimes the plan lay in the subtleties, not just the actions. After a few minutes, William decided it was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Victoria, did you get a chance to review the updated compliance reports from last quarter?" Victoria straightened, the small gesture subtle but telling. "I did. There were a few discrepancies, but nothing critical. I highlighted them in the report for your review." William picked up the folder she had set down. He leafed through it casually, making mental notes, but his eyes were on her. "Good. I'll take a closer look. Thank you for bringing them to my attention." Victoria's expression remained pleasant, almost flawless. But Annie noticed a slight tension in the line of her jaw. Almost imperceptible unless you were watching closely. She jotted it down, her small hand moving quickly, capturing details no one else would think to record. Suddenly, William stood and moved to the desk drawer. He retrieved the small recorder Annie had pointed out days earlier. Glancing at it in his palm, he pressed the switch, confirming it remained off, then placed it in a small secure box. Annie watched silently. She didn't need to ask. She already knew the plan. The recorder was a weapon in plain sight, and William intended to use it wisely. Victoria leaned over the desk again. "Anything else we need to discuss before the board meeting?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, masking curiosity. William shook his head slowly. No, that will be all for now. Thank you. She paused for a moment, studying him, then nodded and smiled again. Very well, I'll see you in the meeting. Victoria left the office, and William exhaled softly, closing the door behind her. He turned to Annie, who was still watching him closely. Good work today, he said. Everything you saw, everything you remembered matters. You're helping me understand things no one else can see. Annie nodded seriously. Yes, sir. William pulled up the camera feed from the previous days, reviewing it carefully with her. They watched Victoria enter the office, place the recorder, make the phone call, and for the first time, William allowed Annie to watch the screen with him. Her small fingers pointed to subtle details he had overlooked, the way she held the phone, the pause before speaking, the faint flicker of a smile when she thought she was unseen. Annie noticed patterns he had missed for years. That's why I needed you to help me, William said quietly. Even adults overlook things. They see only what they want to see. Annie scribbled notes furiously, nodding. I see everything. William leaned back in his chair, glancing out the window at the city below. Soon, we're going to have to be careful with the way we act in front of everyone. The people plotting against us, they think they're in control. We'll let them believe that, but we'll watch and we'll wait. Annie looked up, curious. How do we know what to do next? William smiled faintly. We let them show us and we record everything. Annie nodded, understanding the gravity of the task despite her small size. She had never been asked to do anything like this before. But she was ready because sometimes the smallest observers saw the truth first. The rest of the morning passed with William reviewing reports, checking camera feeds, and quietly taking notes. Annie remained at her post, silent, vigilant, recording what she saw in her notebook. Every gesture, every glance, every step Victoria took in her office had been catalogued. William knew that the more they watched, the more mistakes would appear, and in those mistakes, the plan to protect his company would be born. By lunchtime, William stood and stretched. He looked at Annie, her small frame hunched over the notebook, eyes sharp and alert. He realized again that no matter how skilled the board members were, no matter how clever Halbrook's plans might be, or how polished Victoria appeared, the real advantage lay in observation, patience, and remembering that the truth often came from the places you least expected. Annie, he said softly, we're going to win this. Not by force, not by anger, but by seeing clearly. Do you understand? Annie looked up, her eyes bright. Yes, sir. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, keep watching. And don't forget, even the smallest details can change everything. Outside, the city moved as usual. Cars honked. People rushed to meetings. The world went on. Inside the office, a 6-year-old girl and a billionaire sat side by side, quietly preparing for a war that no one else in Atlanta had even noticed yet. Every glance, every whisper, every note in that small notebook would matter. And William Carter knew for the first time in a long while that the battle ahead was not only about contracts or mergers. It was about seeing clearly, trusting the right people, and never underestimating the smallest observers. William Carter sat back in his chair, staring at the blinking cursor on his computer screen. The city outside was alive with the usual Monday bustle, but inside the office, a different kind of tension lingered. He could feel it in the quiet hum of the air vents, in the faint tapping of keyboards, and in the faint scent of coffee from the break room. The building seemed ordinary, almost serene. But William knew that beneath its polished surfaces, a battle of patience, wits, and subtle strategy was unfolding. He glanced at Annie, who sat cross-legged on the floor near the desk, her notebook open, and pen moving quickly. Her small eyes followed every movement in the office. She wasn't just watching, she was mapping, recording, analyzing the way a strategist would. Only her tools were crayons, a pen, and a notebook. William found himself marveling at her focus. In a world full of distractions, she had the concentration of someone 3 times her age. Annie, he said quietly, leaning slightly forward. I need you to pay even closer attention today. Annie nodded without looking up. Yes, sir, she said. I'll watch everything. Good. Remember, everything counts. Every step, every word, every glance. Sometimes what looks like nothing is actually the whole plan. He paused and studied her expression. You understand? Yes, sir, she replied again. Even the small things, he smiled faintly. Exactly. The smallest things often make the biggest difference. Just then, the office door opened. Victoria stepped in, her heels clicking lightly on the polished floor. She carried her tablet and a folder, her posture impeccable, her smile perfectly timed. Good morning, William, she said warmly. I thought I'd bring some updated projections for the client presentation. William's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained calm. Thank you. Leave them there, please. He gestured to the desk, keeping his movements deliberate. Unhurried, Victoria approached the desk and set the materials down, leaning slightly over the papers. Her hand brushed against the edge of his desktop, a gesture that seemed innocent enough, but William had learned to see past appearances. Every detail, every movement was a clue. He watched her closely, noting how she adjusted the tablet, how she placed the folder, how her eyes flickered toward the camera in the corner. "I've updated the numbers," she said smoothly, and highlighted potential areas for increased efficiency in the client account. She looked at him expectantly, her expression calm and composed. William nodded. "I see. And what about the merger files?" he asked casually as if he had only just remembered them. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but her eyes shifted subtly. "Everything is in order," she said. "I reviewed them personally to ensure a smooth transition after the wedding." William let her words hang in the air. He leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced on the desk. "I appreciate the thoroughness, but you understand why I have to be careful with these files, don't you?" "Of course," she said softly. "You've built an empire here, William. I respect that." She paused, then added. "And I respect you." Her gaze lingered on him just long enough to convey warmth, but not trust. William's mind raced. The recorder, the camera, Halbrook's involvement, the subtle hints Annie had captured, every piece of information was coming together. He had to act with precision. If he misstepped, the merger could be signed without him fully understanding the consequences. That would be catastrophic. Annie scribbled notes quietly, capturing every subtle gesture, every word, every pause. William knew that in these small observations lay the key to understanding the full scope of the plan against him. Victoria was careful, meticulous, but not infallible. Everyone made mistakes. The question was whether he could spot them before they did permanent damage. He turned slightly in his chair, giving Annie a small nod. She understood immediately and adjusted her position, her eyes scanning the room with renewed intensity. She noted how Victoria's hand lingered on the folder a fraction longer than necessary. How her eyes briefly darted toward the security camera, and how she subtly adjusted her posture when William mentioned the files. These were small gestures easily missed, but to someone watching carefully, they spoke volumes. Victoria straightened and picked up the folder. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes with the client team. Would you like me to brief them on your behalf?" she asked, her voice calm, her smile unchanged. "No," William said slowly. "I'll handle it, personally." He watched her reaction closely. A micro-expression flickered across her face, almost imperceptible, a momentary tightening around the eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by her usual composure. Victoria inclined her head. "As you wish," she said, her tone polite. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "William," she added softly, "I hope you're not feeling overworked. You should take some time for yourself." William didn't respond immediately. He let her leave, listening to the faint click of the door as it closed. Once it was shut, he exhaled slowly, turning to Annie. "Did you see that?" he asked quietly. Annie nodded. "Yes, sir." She paused before she left. "I think she was checking the cameras." "Exactly," William said, "and that pause tells us she's aware, careful, and that she believes she controls everything." "But she's wrong," Annie wrote quickly in her notebook. "She won't see us watching." "Good," William said. "Now, let's review the camera feeds from yesterday and today. I want to track her movements down to the second. Every step, every gesture, we're going to find patterns, and patterns are how we anticipate the next move." Annie leaned forward, eyes wide and focused as William pulled up the security system on his monitor. They watched Victoria entering offices, speaking to assistants, reviewing documents. Every small motion, every glance was catalogued. Annie pointed out subtle behaviors William had missed before. A flicker of her finger over the edge of a document. A slight hesitation before turning a page. The exact timing of when she glanced at the ceiling camera. "Notice the pause there," Annie said, pointing to the screen. "She waits 2 seconds before picking up the folder." William nodded. "That pause is a clue. It shows she's nervous, even though she's trying to hide it." "Good catch," Annie scribbled in her notebook, the small handwriting, neat and precise. "She's doing the same thing she did when she planted the recorder," she said. Checking, listening, William leaned back in his chair, watching the replay again. "Every time she does this, she reveals a little more about her strategy, and we can use that." Annie looked up. "We're going to catch her." "Yes," William said quietly, almost to himself. "We're going to catch her, but we have to be patient. Watch, listen, record. The next mistake will tell us everything." Annie nodded, her small face serious. "I understand, sir." William looked at her for a long moment, a rare smile flickering across his face. "You're very good at this, Annie. Smarter than most adults I know." She blushed slightly but didn't look away. "Thank you, sir." They continued reviewing the footage. The office silent except for the quiet clicks of the computer and the occasional scribble of Annie's pen. Each moment, each observation was a piece of the puzzle. And William Carter knew that once they had enough pieces, they would have the full picture. a picture that would reveal every lie, every plan, every betrayal, and give him the chance to take control before it was too late. By mid-morning, William had a plan forming. He would not confront Victoria yet. He would let her think she was in control. He would let her continue her small maneuvers, all while gathering evidence, observing patterns, and preparing the moves that would protect his company, his reputation, and his future. And through it all, Annie would be there, silent, small, invisible to everyone else, but essential to him, the smallest observer, the clearest witness, and perhaps the only person who could see the truth before it was too late. William Carter spent the entire morning in his office, sitting quietly behind his desk, letting the hum of the computers and the soft clicks of Annie's pen guide his thoughts. The city outside moved with its usual urgency, but inside the building, time felt different, slower, precise, deliberate. He had realized over the past week that patience was now more powerful than anger, and observation more effective than confrontation. Victoria believed she had the upper hand, and he intended to let her feel that way. All while quietly preparing the counter-strategy, Annie sat cross-legged near the reception area, notebook in hand. She was cataloging every small gesture, every micro-expression, every whispered conversation she could see or hear. William had made her a quiet partner in surveillance, and she took the role seriously. Each scribble in her notebook was a line of defense, a piece of intelligence. "Annie," William said softly, leaning back in his chair, "I need you to focus on everything Victoria does today. Every pause, every glance, every word she uses when she thinks no one is watching." Annie looked up, her small eyes bright. "Yes, sir, like a detective." "Exactly like a detective," William said. "The most important detail might be the smallest thing. Don't let it escape you." Annie nodded firmly. "I'll watch everything." The office door opened and Victoria stepped in, holding a tablet and a folder. She carried herself with ease, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor, a subtle rhythm that made the office feel alive. "William, good morning," she said, her voice calm, warm, and perfectly measured. "I thought I'd bring these updated projections for review before the board meeting." William's eyes followed her, noting every movement, every pause. He gestured to the chair beside the desk. "Place them there, please." Victoria leaned slightly, setting the folder down, her eyes flicking momentarily toward the corner camera. A subtle pause. William's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Annie noticed too, jotting it down in her notebook. The detail was small, almost invisible, but meaningful. "I've updated the projections," Victoria continued smoothly. "There are some minor discrepancies, but nothing significant. I've highlighted areas that could improve efficiency and optimize client engagement." William nodded slowly. "I see. And the merger files?" he asked casually as if he had only just remembered them. Victoria's expression remained composed. "Everything is in order. I personally reviewed all relevant files to ensure there would be no surprises post-wedding." William leaned back, letting his fingers interlace, studying her carefully. "I appreciate the thoroughness, but you understand why I need to be cautious with these files, correct?" "Of course," Victoria replied softly. "You've built something incredible here. I respect that." She paused for just a moment, and William noticed a flicker of calculation in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by her practiced warmth. He watched closely as she straightened, adjusted her posture, and crossed her arms for a brief instant, another subtle sign of control, another cue for him to observe. "William," she said, shifting to a slightly lighter tone, "we should discuss potential reallocation of team responsibilities. If the merger goes through, these minor adjustments could smooth the transition." He nodded slowly. "Yes, minor adjustments make sense. But we'll review everything carefully before making any decision." Annie scribbled furiously. Every gesture, every word, every slight hesitation Victoria made was being recorded in detail. William knew these notes would become invaluable. Victoria believed she controlled the pace, but each small observation added to a larger map of her strategy, one only he and Annie could see. "Thank you for your insight," William said calmly. "I'll take it under advisement." Victoria smiled, her expression flawless, and began to leave. "I have another meeting in 15 minutes, she said, "but I wanted to make sure you had all the information first." As she reached the door, she paused, her eyes swept across the office, landing briefly on Annie and then back on William. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," she added. The tone casual, almost teasing. William's voice remained calm. "Not at all. Annie was just assisting me with some preparations for the scholarship program." Victoria tilted her head slightly regarding Annie. "Helping with a scholarship program? That's impressive for someone her age." Annie nodded politely, clutching her notebook. "Yes, ma'am." "Very well," Victoria said, smiling again. "I'll see you at the board meeting." The door closed behind her, and William turned to Annie. "Good work," he said softly. "You notice details others overlook. Every pause, every glance, it matters." Annie beamed slightly, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also pride in her role. I'm trying, sir. William nodded, then pulled up the security feeds from the past 2 days. They watched Victoria enter the office, place the recorder, and make phone calls. This time, they could hear the audio clearly. Victoria's voice, calm and confident, outlined plans that were no longer theoretical. She spoke of contracts, mergers, and steps that would remove William from his own company. Annie pointed to subtle movements on the screen. See how she hesitates just before picking up the files. That's when she checks the cameras. William leaned closer, impressed. Exactly. Every pause, every glance, every hesitation tells us what she's thinking, and those are the moments we need to use. They continued reviewing the footage for hours. Annie noted how Victoria adjusted documents, glanced at screens, and coordinated with assistants. William analyzed her voice inflections, the timing of her gestures, and the slight shifts in her body language. Piece by piece, pattern by pattern, they constructed a map of her strategy. By the afternoon, William had formulated a preliminary plan. He would not confront Victoria directly. He would let her operate under the assumption that she remained in control, all while gathering the evidence he needed and preparing countermeasures. And Annie, quiet, vigilant, and meticulous, would continue observing, documenting, and ensuring nothing escaped their notice. Annie, he said quietly, leaning back in his chair. The more we know, the more control we have. We watch, we record, and we wait for the right moment. Do you understand? Annie's eyes were wide and serious. Yes, sir, everything matters. William gave her a small, approving nod. Good. Today, we take another step. Every observation, every note in that notebook brings us closer to seeing the full picture. Outside, Atlanta moved on. As usual, cars honked, people rushed, lives continued. Inside the office, William Carter and Annie, a billionaire and a 6-year-old girl, sat quietly, meticulously preparing for the confrontation that would determine not just the future of the company, but who controlled the truth, who saw clearly, and who would be able to act decisively when the time came. And William knew with a certainty that had been missing for days, that the smallest observer in the building might be their most powerful ally. William Carter arrived at the office earlier than usual on Thursday. The building almost empty except for the cleaning staff and the occasional security guard making their rounds. The city outside was alive with mid-morning energy, but inside everything seemed still, the air thick with anticipation. William had a plan forming in his mind, one that required precision, patience, and timing. Every piece of information gathered over the past week, every subtle observation was about to come together. Annie was already at her usual spot near the reception desk, notebook in hand, eyes sharp and attentive. She had been watching, recording, noting. Just as William had instructed, today her role was more critical than ever. Every small gesture, every movement of Victoria, every action of anyone in the building could provide insight into the larger plan. William needed her attention now more than ever. Annie, he said softly as he entered. Today we begin the next phase. I need you to watch more closely than ever. Annie nodded, her small face serious. Yes, sir, I'll watch everything. Good. Remember, timing is everything. Patterns are our allies. Watch for pauses, glances, hesitations. Everything that seems unimportant can reveal the truth. Annie scribbled quickly in her notebook, her small fingers moving faster than anyone would expect. William took a moment to observe her. The way she leaned forward slightly, the focus in her eyes, it was remarkable. He thought again that the smallest observer in the building might just be the most important. At precisely 9:15, the door opened. Victoria stepped in, her heels clicking softly on the floor, her tablet and folder in hand, her posture perfect. She smiled at William, a practiced warmth, and set the materials down on his desk. Good morning, she said lightly. I thought we could review the updated projections before the board meeting. William looked at her calmly. Thank you. Place them there. He gestured toward the stack of papers on the desk. Victoria leaned slightly, adjusting the folder as she did, and William noticed her eyes flicker toward the corner camera. She paused, almost imperceptibly, then continued her movements as if nothing had happened. Annie's eyes widened slightly. She immediately jotted the detail in her notebook. I've highlighted areas that could improve efficiency, Victoria said smoothly. And ensured all documents are consistent for the client presentation, William nodded slowly. I see. And the merger files. Any updates I should know about? Victoria's expression remained flawless. Everything is in order. I personally reviewed all the files to make sure there are no surprises. It's ready for your approval. William leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced, his gaze calm. Good. Accuracy is essential. Thank you for your diligence. Victoria smiled, pleased with the affirmation. She adjusted her posture slightly, subtly, emphasizing her presence as though the office belonged half to her. William watched every detail, noting the rhythm of her movements, the tone of her voice, and the small gestures that betrayed more than they revealed. Annie, seated across the room, recorded it all meticulously. Suddenly, A faint chime from the office computer indicated a message had arrived. William picked it up without changing his expression. It was from Mark. Subject is moving files again. Same sequence as yesterday. Wait until afternoon to act. William nodded to himself. Timing. He reminded himself. The key was timing. Let them move. Let them think they are in control. When the pattern is predictable, the trap can be set. Annie, William whispered, leaning toward her. Today, we're going to watch for that pattern. Do you see it? Annie looked up briefly, then back at her notebook. Yes, sir, I see it. Every time she thinks no one is watching, she does the same thing. Exactly, William said. Every repetition is a clue. Every gesture repeated is a signal. We wait for the right moment and we act. Victoria, unaware that she was being studied so closely, continued explaining minor adjustments in her presentation, her voice steady and composed. William and Annie watched the nuances. A slight hesitation before she turned a page. The way she set the tablet down, the tiny shift of her eyes to the ceiling camera, each action was catalogued, each motion a piece of the puzzle. At 11, Victoria glanced at her watch. I'll need to leave for a client call in 30 minutes, she said, her tone casual but commanding. Would you like me to brief the team before I go? William shook his head calmly. I'll handle it myself. Her eyes flickered for the briefest moment, but her smile remained. Very well, she said. I'll leave the documents here for you to review. Victoria moved toward the door, pausing just slightly to glance at Annie. The child's small body hunched over the notebook seemed unimportant to anyone else. But William noticed the subtle change in Victoria's expression. A fraction of doubt, almost imperceptible. Annie noticed it, too, scribbling it down immediately. The door closed behind her and William exhaled slowly. He turned to Annie who looked up at him expectantly. Every movement she made, every pause, every glance has been recorded. That is exactly what we needed, he said quietly. Do you understand how critical this is? Yes, sir, Annie replied firmly. I understand. William leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Good. Now, we prepare for the afternoon. She thinks she is controlling the flow. That is our advantage. We wait for her to repeat the sequence. Once she does, we act carefully. Precisely. Annie looked down at her notebook. I won't miss anything. I know, William said. Because you notice what adults often overlook. That is why you are essential to this plan. Annie blushed slightly, but didn't look away. I want to help, sir. William studied her for a long moment. You are helping more than you know. Today we continue gathering evidence. Every word, every step, every action we record will be used. Patience is our greatest weapon. The morning passed with meticulous observation. Every movement of Victoria captured and analyzed by William and Annie. Every subtle pause and gesture was catalogued. Every glance scrutinized. William knew that when the time came, the information they collected would allow him to act decisively, exposing the betrayals without giving Victoria or Halbrook's systems any warning. By midday, he felt a quiet satisfaction. The plan was in motion. The patterns were becoming clear, and the trap could now be prepared. Annie's small hand moved steadily, documenting everything. The most valuable ally in a game that few adults could understand. William looked out the glass wall at the bustling streets below, then back at Annie. We're close, he said softly. Very close. And when the time comes, everything will fall into place. The truth will be revealed, and we will be ready. Annie nodded, determination in her eyes. I'll be ready, sir. William gave her a small, approving nod. Good. Today we wait, we observe, and we prepare. Everything else will follow. William Carter arrived at the office on Thursday afternoon with a quiet intensity that made the usually busy corridors feel subdued. The early spring sunlight slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. He passed the lobby without a word, nodding briefly to the receptionist, who barely noticed him. Every step he took was deliberate, measured. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to observe, to plan, and to wait for the smallest sign that would tell him everything he needed to know. Annie was at her usual spot near the reception area, sitting cross-legged with her notebook open on her lap. Her small fingers moved rapidly across the page, recording movements, gestures, and minor expressions she had noticed in the previous days. William gave her a small nod. She returned it, already understanding that today required more vigilance than ever. Annie, William said quietly. Today, we're going to focus on the patterns. Every time Victoria moves, or speaks, there is a sequence. Watch it closely. I need every small detail. Yes, sir, Annie said, her voice low and serious. I'll watch everything. He glanced around the nearly empty office and then back at Annie. Do you understand why this is important? Yes, sir, she replied. If we see everything, we can stop her. William leaned against his desk, folding his arms. Exactly. Timing and patience are our allies. Don't miss a single pause, glance, or hesitation. Even a small gesture can tell us who is in control. The office door opened at precisely 1:30 p.m. Victoria entered with her usual calm, elegant stride, holding a tablet and a folder. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor. She smiled warmly at William. "Good afternoon," she said. "I thought we could review the afternoon's agenda before the board meeting." William nodded. "Place the materials here, please," he said, gesturing toward his desk. Victoria leaned over slightly as she set the folder down, and William immediately noticed a subtle flick of her eyes toward the corner camera. A brief pause, nothing overt, just a fraction of hesitation. Annie's eyes widened. She immediately jotted it down in her notebook. This was exactly the kind of detail they needed. "I've highlighted several items that may need attention," Victoria continued, her voice steady. "I've also marked areas where efficiency can be improved in the client account. It's all carefully reviewed and ready for your input." William nodded slowly. "Thank you. And the merger files?" Victoria's smile remained composed. "All in order. I've double-checked them. Everything is prepared for your review before the board meeting. No surprises." William leaned back slightly, fingers interlaced, studying her. He noted how her hands lingered briefly on the folder, how she shifted her weight slightly, and how her eyes glanced toward the ceiling. Every subtle motion was catalogued in his mind, every gesture analyzed. Annie, quietly watching, recorded each nuance in her notebook. William spoke casually. "I appreciate the thoroughness. Accuracy is essential." Victoria's expression did not change, but Annie noticed her slight pause before she responded. A brief moment when her composure faltered, she scribbled furiously in her notebook, capturing the detail that might later become crucial. "You've been very diligent," William continued, maintaining a calm tone. "I value precision in these matters." Victoria inclined her head slightly. "Thank you. I just want to ensure everything runs smoothly." She paused and smiled. "I know how important the upcoming board meeting is." William's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yes, it is important, and I want to make sure everything is as expected." Annie leaned closer to her notebook, noting the exact timing of Victoria's words and gestures. Every repetition of behavior would help identify the pattern, and the pattern was what they needed to anticipate her next move. Victoria set the folder down and stepped back. "I have another call scheduled in 15 minutes with a client, but I wanted to ensure you had all the information beforehand." William nodded. "Very well, I'll handle the review on my own." Victoria paused near the door, casting another brief glance at Annie. Something unspoken passed in that moment, a recognition that the child was observing but not threatening. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said lightly. William remained calm. "Not at all. Annie was assisting me with the scholarship program materials." Victoria smiled, still poised. "Helping with a scholarship program? That's impressive." She walked toward the door. "I'll leave you to it." Then the moment the door closed, William turned to Annie. "Good work," he said softly. "Every detail matters. Every glance, pause, and gesture you record helps us see the truth behind appearances." Annie looked up determined. "I won't miss anything, sir." William nodded. "Good. Today, we observe, we record, and we prepare. Patterns will reveal themselves, and when they do, we will act." He turned back to the security monitor and pulled up footage from the past 2 days. They watched Victoria entering offices, checking documents, speaking to assistants. This time the audio was enabled and they could hear her conversations. Each word, each subtle shift in tone provided insight into her plans. Annie pointed to moments where Victoria's voice softened or hesitated, micro-expressions and vocal cues that indicated the steps she was taking to manipulate the environment. William leaned back in his chair, absorbing every detail. Every repeated gesture, every carefully measured pause shows us how she operates. That is what we need to exploit. Her confidence becomes her weakness. Annie scribbled quickly, noting the precise timing of Victoria's gestures, the way she adjusted documents, and how she interacted with others. "She's doing the same thing she did when she planted the recorder," Annie said softly, checking, listening, making sure no one notices. William nodded slowly. "Exactly. That consistency is how we predict her next move. When the pattern repeats, we will know how to intervene." They continued reviewing the footage, silent except for the quiet hum of the monitors and Annie's pen scratching across the paper. William understood that the more meticulous the observation, the clearer the pattern would become, and once the pattern was clear, they would have the advantage, the power to act decisively without warning. By late afternoon, William stood and stretched, glancing at Annie. Her small frame, hunched over the notebook, was completely focused. "You are invaluable," he said quietly. "Without your observations, the smallest details might escape me, and those details can change everything." Annie smiled faintly, but did not speak. Continuing her work, William returned to the window, looking out over the city below. Cars moved along the streets, pedestrians hurried past, and life continued unaware of the silent, precise war unfolding inside the building. He knew that within these walls, the next few days would determine not just the future of his company, but the exposure of deception, the unveiling of truth, and the moment when patience and observation would pay off. Turning back to Annie, William said, "The next move she makes will tell us everything. We stay quiet, we observe, we wait, and when the time is right, we act." Annie nodded, small and determined. "Yes, sir, we'll be ready." William Carter allowed himself a rare, small smile. "Good. Today, the smallest observer becomes the clearest witness, and that will be our greatest advantage." The office remained silent as they continued to watch, study, and record, preparing for the moment when the carefully laid plans of their adversaries would begin to unravel, revealing the truth in plain sight, and giving them the chance to regain control before it was too late. William Carter spent the morning reviewing the security footage from the previous week. Every glance, every hesitation, every subtle shift Victoria had made in his office, during meetings, or in private moments, was catalogued and studied. Annie sat at her usual spot, notebook open, fingers moving swiftly, recording the same observations from her vantage point. She had learned to notice the tiniest details. The way Victoria's shoulders tensed before answering a question, the fraction of a second she glanced at the ceiling camera. The barely perceptible pause before she touched any document on the desk. "Annie," William said quietly, leaning over his monitor. "Today, we're going to focus on her meetings, every call, every conversation she thinks is private. I need you to observe and note the timing, the sequence, and the body language." Annie nodded firmly. "Yes, sir, I see everything." William allowed himself a rare smile. The child's concentration was extraordinary. For 6 years old, she could detect patterns most adults missed. And in this game, patterns were the key to understanding the plan against him. At precisely 10 a.m., Victoria entered his office carrying her tablet and a folder, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She smiled at him warmly. "Good morning, William. I thought we could go over the client proposals before the afternoon calls." William nodded slowly. "Please leave the materials on the desk." She leaned slightly as she set the folder down, her eyes flicking briefly toward the corner camera. A small, almost imperceptible pause. Annie immediately jotted it down. She checked the camera again. Annie whispered. William's eyes narrowed slightly. "Exactly. Every pause, every glance, every minor hesitation is a clue." Victoria began discussing the client proposals, presenting her ideas with practiced ease, her tone calm and persuasive. She referenced potential efficiencies, minor adjustments, and strategies to improve client engagement. William listened, nodding thoughtfully, asking subtle questions without revealing his true knowledge. He let her believe she was steering the conversation while in reality he was mapping her tactics. Watching how she handled each detail, Annie leaned forward in her chair, eyes sharp. She noticed the way Victoria's hand hovered over the folder before picking it up. The slight tilt of her head as she spoke and the micro-expressions that flitted across her face when she thought she was unobserved. Every movement was recorded in her notebook. "Annie," William whispered, "the patterns are forming. Do you see them?" "Yes, sir," Annie replied. Every time she thinks she's not being watched, she repeats the same gestures, the same pauses. William nodded. "Good. That repetition is what will allow us to predict her next move." Victoria adjusted the papers on the desk, her movements precise, controlled. "William, I think these proposals need your signature before the client review. I've highlighted the key points to focus on." He picked up the folder casually, flipping through it. "I see. Thank you for organizing this." He studied her eyes, noting how they briefly shifted toward the ceiling camera before returning to his face. Another tiny pause. Another piece of the puzzle. Annie scribbled furiously. "She's doing the same thing she did with the recorder," she whispered, checking and making sure no one is watching. William allowed himself a quiet nod. "Exactly. That's her method. Confidence through control, thinking she's invisible. But we see everything." Victoria smiled, placing her hand lightly on the folder. "I'll need to join the call in 15 minutes. Would you like me to brief the team on your behalf?" William shook his head calmly. "I'll handle the call myself. Thank you." She paused at the doorway, glancing at Annie with a practiced smile. "You must be very smart to assist Mr. Carter." Annie nodded politely, clutching her notebook. Victoria gave a small, satisfied nod. "Very well, I'll see you at the client call." The door closed behind her, and William turned to Annie. "That's exactly the kind of subtle behavior we need to capture. Every glance, every gesture, every small hesitation tells us more than words ever could." Annie's eyes were wide and serious. "I won't miss anything, sir." William leaned back, reviewing the camera feeds with her. They watched Victoria walking through the office, speaking to assistants, reviewing documents, and occasionally checking the cameras. Audio captured her conversations, allowing them to understand the sequence of her instructions, the priorities she set, and the subtle hints of the larger plan. Annie pointed out patterns, noting her tone, pauses, and pacing. William catalogued it all mentally, linking each observation to previous behavior. Notice how she pauses before making a phone call, Annie said. She waits a few seconds, then dials, and her tone changes slightly when she thinks she's not observed. William nodded. Yes, those pauses indicate careful planning. And when people plan carefully, they make predictable mistakes. That's our advantage. They continued monitoring for several hours. The office quiet except for the faint hum of the computers and Annie's pen scratching across the notebook. William understood that every repetition, every predictable action was an opportunity to gain control. The more Victoria revealed through her patterns, the closer he came to understanding the full extent of the plan against him. By mid-afternoon, William formulated a preliminary strategy. He would continue to observe, let Victoria operate under the illusion of control, and use the information gathered to anticipate and counter her moves. Annie's observations would be central to this, her notes acting as a map of the manipulations and intentions surrounding him. Annie, William said quietly, the next step is critical. We watch, we record, and we wait. The pattern will repeat, and when it does, we will know exactly how to respond. Annie nodded, determination in her eyes. Yes, sir, we'll be ready. William glanced out the window at the bustling city below. Cars moved along the streets. Pedestrians hurried to meetings, and life continued, unaware of the silent, precise war unfolding in the office. He turned back to Annie, her small hand poised over the notebook, ready to capture every detail. The smallest observer sees what the adults cannot, he said softly. And today we will use that to our advantage. For the first time in weeks, William felt a measure of calm confidence. The pieces were aligning, the patterns emerging, and with Annie's keen observations, he could anticipate moves before they were executed. The battle was far from over, but the advantage was shifting. And when the moment to act came, William Carter knew they would be ready to expose the deception, reclaim control, and turn the carefully laid plans of their adversaries against them. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of William Carter's office, casting long, angular shadows across the polished floors. The city below buzzed with its usual rhythm, cars honking, people hurrying. But inside the office, the air was dense with anticipation. William leaned against his desk, reviewing the notes Annie had compiled over the last several days. Every gesture, pause, glance, and subtle inflection of Victoria's voice had been recorded in meticulous detail. Annie sat on the floor, notebook in hand, her small fingers moving furiously. She had learned to see what others didn't. The tiny gestures, the half-second hesitation, the subtle shift in posture details that adults often overlooked. William observed her quietly, impressed with the child's focus and precision. She was no longer just a helper. She was a partner in gathering intelligence, a silent observer who could notice the invisible. Annie, he said softly. Today is critical. Everything we've watched, every pattern, every gesture will come together. We must be precise. Yes, sir, Annie said, her voice firm, eyes wide and serious. I see everything. Good, William replied. Victoria believes she controls the flow, but her patterns reveal her intentions. We wait for the repetition. That's when we act. At 9:15, Victoria entered the office, carrying her tablet and a folder. Her heels clicked softly on the polished floor, the rhythm deliberate, measured. She smiled warmly at William. Good morning. I thought we could review the client proposals before the board calls. William nodded. Please leave the materials on the desk. Victoria leaned slightly, adjusting the folder, and her eyes flicked briefly toward the corner camera. Annie's eyes widened, pen flying across the page to record the micro-expression. That tiny pause, almost imperceptible, betrayed her awareness and her careful calculation. I've highlighted several areas that could improve efficiency. Victoria continued, her voice smooth and confident. Everything is consistent and prepared for your review. William nodded slowly, letting her speak while observing every detail. He noticed the subtle way she adjusted her posture when she thought no one was watching. The micro-twitch of her lips as she considered what to say next, the slight tension in her shoulders. Annie scribbled every detail, her small fingers keeping pace with the story unfolding in real time. William, Victoria said, leaning slightly over the desk. We should also discuss reallocating some responsibilities for efficiency. If the merger moves forward, it will streamline operations. William tilted his head slightly, nodding. Efficiency is important, but we'll review the details carefully before implementing anything. Her eyes flicked to the ceiling camera again, a fraction of a second hesitation. Annie noted it immediately. William allowed a quiet smile to form. The pattern was emerging. Repetition revealed truth. Victoria moved toward the door. I'll be joining the client call shortly. I wanted to ensure you had all the information before I leave. She paused, casting a glance at Annie. The child's small frame hunched over her notebook did not intimidate her. But her subtle look of scrutiny did not escape Victoria's awareness. She adjusted her expression. masking the slight recognition. Not at all, William said calmly. Annie was assisting me with the scholarship program. Victoria smiled. Helping with a scholarship program. That's admirable for someone her age. Annie nodded politely, holding the notebook tightly. Victoria walked to the door, her posture elegant, and looked back. I'll see you at the client call. When the door closed, William turned to Annie. Excellent. Every detail she exposed, every hesitation, every micro-expression, it all adds to our understanding. The pattern is becoming clearer. Yes, sir, Annie said, I can see it now. Every time she thinks no one is watching, she does the same things. William pulled up the camera footage from the past week. They watched Victoria enter offices, review documents, and make phone calls. Audio revealed her instructions, the subtle cues to her associates, and the careful planning she engaged in to maintain control. Annie pointed out small nuances, the inflection in her voice, the micro-timing of her gestures, the brief glance toward cameras. Notice how she pauses before each call, Annie said quietly. She checks for observation and adjusts herself before speaking. William nodded. Exactly. That pause tells us where she is confident and where she is concealing something. That is what we will use against her. The afternoon passed in near silence, broken only by the hum of computers and Annie's pen on paper. William studied the monitors and Annie's notes, linking patterns, predicting behavior, and noting where the first cracks might appear. Every repeated gesture, every predictable action became a blueprint for the countermeasures he planned. By late afternoon, William had pieced together a strategy. He would allow Victoria to continue her maneuvering, letting her believe she was in control. While he and Annie prepared to intercept the plan at the right moment, Annie's meticulous observations had revealed enough for him to anticipate her next moves. Annie, he said, leaning slightly forward. The next time she repeats this pattern, we act quietly, precisely. We do not alert her. We do not act prematurely. Yes, sir, Annie said, eyes focused and determined. I'll be ready. William looked out at the city below. The streets filled with ordinary people going about their lives, oblivious to the silent, meticulous battle unfolding in this office. He turned back to Annie, her small frame hunched over the notebook, eyes scanning for the slightest anomaly. The smallest observer sees what adults cannot, and today that observation will give us the advantage. Annie nodded. I won't miss anything, sir. William allowed himself a moment of rare satisfaction. The patterns were clear, the plan forming. And with Annie's keen eye, he could anticipate every move before it was executed. The trap would be set. And when the moment came, the truth would be exposed. And for the first time in weeks, William Carter felt the shift control was returning to his hands, one precise observation at a time. The boardroom was quiet, the sunlight slanting through the tall windows casting sharp angles across the polished table. William Carter entered last, his presence commanding but understated. He took a seat at the head of the table, glancing around at the familiar faces of executives and legal advisors. They were unaware that the carefully orchestrated game of deception that had been unfolding for weeks was about to reach its climax. Annie sat in the corner of the room, her small frame barely noticeable beneath the long conference table. Her notebook was open, pen poised. She was tense but calm, her eyes darting to the entrances, noting every movement. William had instructed her to observe silently, record every detail and wait for the right moment to act. Today she was the unseen sentinel. The meeting began with routine updates, quarterly earnings, client progress, and logistical challenges. Victoria sat at William's right, projecting her usual calm authority, offering suggestions with ease and subtle charm. She smiled when executives responded positively, her confidence radiating, hiding the tension William had seen in her micro-expressions over the past weeks. William's attention was elsewhere. He reviewed Annie's notes silently, cross-referencing them with the footage from the cameras, the patterns they had observed, the gestures and pauses, the subtle shifts in tone, every movement Victoria had made, every command she had issued, every pause for effect, all of it had been catalogued, and now they could anticipate her next move with precision. At a critical point in the meeting, Victoria suggested a minor adjustment in the allocation of resources, the kind of move designed to test William's response and gauge his understanding. She expected compliance or at least differential negotiation. William leaned back in his chair and studied her calmly. He let a few seconds pass before responding, letting the silence hang, allowing the room to feel the tension. You're suggesting these reallocations, William said, his voice neutral. Based on what data? Victoria's eyes flickered briefly toward him. Just long enough to see his focus, but not long enough to convey alarm. I analyzed the projections, she said smoothly, and considered the client engagement metrics. It seemed logical to optimize these departments. William nodded slowly, turning slightly toward Annie. She noticed the subtle glance, a signal only she would understand. He was about to set the trap. Interesting, William said. And who reviewed these changes before presenting them here? Victoria hesitated fractionally, an almost imperceptible tightening. around her eyes. The pause was brief, but Annie noticed it immediately and recorded it in her notebook. I reviewed them myself, she said carefully, and cross-checked with the team. William's lips curved slightly. I see. And these decisions, were they made independently or under external advice? Victoria's smile remained calm, but a slight shift in her posture betrayed a flicker of tension. Independent, of course, she said smoothly. I wanted to ensure the integrity of the recommendations. William leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. Very well, let's review the documentation together. Step by step, he reached for the folder she had brought, opening it deliberately in front of the board. Annie's eyes were sharp. She noticed the subtle reactions in the executive's small nods, hesitant glances, the way they shifted papers nervously. Victoria was confident, but she was revealing too much. Every gesture, every pause was evidence. As William flipped through the pages, he began asking specific questions that forced Victoria to repeat information she had rehearsed. Each repetition revealed slight inconsistencies. A misaligned figure here, a vague reference there. The executives were unaware, but Annie saw everything. She scribbled furiously, noting the subtle contradictions, the moments when Victoria's composure slipped. William's questions grew more pointed. And these projections, were they cross-verified with the financial reports from last quarter? Victoria's voice remained calm, but her hands shifted slightly on the table. Yes, they were cross-verified. By whom? William asked. Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling momentarily, a micro-expression of anxiety that Annie immediately captured in her notebook. By the team, she said. I personally oversaw the review. William allowed a brief pause before continuing. And these recommendations, he said, pointing to a specific table. Are you suggesting them based on your independent analysis, or were you guided by someone external? Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Independent as I said, she replied. William looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the board members. Let's verify that, he said, opening his laptop and projecting the documents from the security camera feed. Showing Victoria entering his office, placing the recorder and speaking into the phone, the audio played clearly, capturing every word. The room went silent. Executives leaned forward, eyes wide. Annie's small voice, normally inaudible, whispered a simple observation. She said. After the wedding, he'll sign. Everything will be ours. William nodded toward her, signaling the importance. The evidence was irrefutable. The room absorbed it slowly as disbelief turned into comprehension. Victoria's carefully maintained composure wavered just slightly, her eyes darting between William and the projected footage. William's voice was calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, the data speaks for itself. What we see here is a deliberate attempt to manipulate decisions, to influence the merger, and to gain control of this company through deception. Victoria's face remained composed, but the tension was visible now in her posture and the slight quiver of her hand as she set the tablet down. She tried to recover her charm, but the evidence was undeniable. Annie's eyes were wide, but she remained silent, watching the outcome of the observations she had made over the past weeks. Her role had been quiet, unseen, yet crucial. Every note she had taken, every gesture she had recorded contributed to the clarity that now revealed the truth, William continued. This is why observation, detail, and patience are essential. Patterns, when noticed, tell us more than words ever could. And today, the truth is clear. The executives looked to each other, murmuring, finally understanding the scope of the deception that had been unfolding within their midst. Victoria's plan, meticulous and cunning, had been undone by a combination of careful observation, thorough documentation, and the patience to wait for the right moment. William leaned back in his chair, glancing toward Annie. She gave him a small, confident nod, her pen poised above the notebook. He knew she understood the power of what had just occurred. The smallest observer, unnoticed and underestimated, had helped reveal the truth that might otherwise have remained hidden. Victoria's eyes met William's. For the first time, the smile she had relied upon for weeks faltered. The boardroom, once a place of subtle manipulation, had shifted. Control had passed back to William, reinforced by meticulous observation, timing, and the invaluable insight of a 6-year-old girl who saw what no one else did. William spoke softly, yet with authority that resonated through the room. Let this be a lesson. Deception may work in private, but truth carefully observed will always prevail. Annie's small hand rested on her notebook, a silent testament to the power of vigilance, patience, and the courage to notice what others missed. William knew this was not just the end of the deception, but the beginning of a new understanding of trust, loyalty, and the unseen forces that shaped every decision in his world. The boardroom remained quiet, but the shift in energy was palpable. Victoria, once confident and controlling, now faced the undeniable consequence of her actions. William sat back calm, his mind already planning the next steps to secure the company and ensure that such a betrayal could never threaten them again. Annie looked up at him, and for the first time that day, William allowed himself a small, genuine smile. You did very well today, he said quietly. You helped reveal the truth. She returned the smile shyly but firmly. I just watched, sir. William shook his head slightly, acknowledging her brilliance. Sometimes watching is the most powerful action of all. Outside the tall windows, the city moved on, oblivious to the battle that had been waged and won in quiet observation, careful patience, and unwavering attention to detail. Inside, William Carter and Annie understood that they had not only preserved the company, but had revealed the power of vigilance, the value of truth, and the extraordinary insight of a small unseen observer who had changed everything. The story teaches us that vigilance, patience, and careful observation are more powerful than assumptions or appearances. It shows that even those who seem small or overlooked, like Annie, can uncover truth and justice through attention to detail and courage. Ultimately, it reminds us that integrity, awareness, and the willingness to notice what others ignore are key to protecting what is valuable and standing up against deception. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration,